Hello, Isaac.
Hello, Rabbi. Good evening.
I haven't seen
Uh,
you in years.
Well, happy Shabbos. I'm looking forward to the Sabbath starting in a few minutes.
I'm going to the synagogue tonight, and for the first time ever in our readings, Jesus is going to synagogue.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I always wonder. I look in the mirror and I see no parallels between me and Jesus. We're
Uh-huh.
Jewish, we're circumcised, and it ends.
Yeah.
And finally, finally, we're here where we see Jesus. He's going to synagogue. And just I don't really go to synagogue because since COVID, I haven't been to synagogue like in 10 months or so. Living in the beautiful, Jerusalem of New Jersey, in Teaneck, we have the situation that every block has a prayer service on it, and
Hmm.
I'm going to go pray with 10 to 20 people tonight, but no
Hmm.
synagogue. So if anything, it's very interesting. The synagogue that I'm going to pray at tonight much more closely parallels the synagogues that Jesus preached at in size, in number. We can prove this, and we'll talk about this today, in size and number. So if anything, I'm walking along those Jesus steps more so than I did when I was just going to synagogue. Because the synagogues here, they have
Hmm.
400 people. They're packed. There's food. There's drinks. Now I go, you pray, you chat for 10 seconds, you go home. So definitely, it's closer to what was happening in first century Galilee.
Rabbi, it's music to my ears, Rabbi. Amen. So that's not Matthew 4, verse 23. The Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 4, verse 23. And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people.
Wow, this is such a long verse. There's like 5 or 6 pieces, so we'll do our best, like usual, to break it down piece by piece. Um, and I think the first thing we have to note is how this is in dire contrast to almost everything we talked about with him recruiting the disciples by Capernaum or by the Sea of Galilee. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's almost like it worked. He said, "Follow me." The disciples followed me. He called to them, and either he got excited or it worked, or we don't know why, but he kind of changed his model. What we talked about of do you collect disciples or do you collect teachers? And
Mhm.
he collects disciples, and now he goes and starts the marketing machine. And now no, I'm saying like the charismatic leader, or if you want to call it the itinerant, preacher. And all of a sudden, he changes his attitude, and he goes all throughout Galilee. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. Teaching
Mhm.
in their synagogues. Okay,
Mhm.
so the first question.
Okay, let's take a step back. So this is the evangelist saying that after this time, that Jesus traveled throughout Galilee. What is so surprising is, so we know that Jesus had at least 12 disciples. The evangelist makes no mention of them. So wouldn't it not have made obvious sense for the evangelist to say, and then he took this person and called this person, then he went. Versus it sounds like at this point, and based on this text so far, it sounds like we have Jesus, we have Simon, we have Andrew, James, and John,
That's
right?
it.
That's it. But but that's what evangelist wants us to know. But we know that's not the case, right? Jesus had his 12 people.
That's all he
He's
had. That's all he had yet. What's wrong with that? That's all he had. They don't exist yet.
so here's my so is that what the evangelist wants us to think, or is that what actually
I feel
happened?
like you're reading chapter 2 and chapter 3 already, or like future chapters. That we don't know there's more disciples yet. Right now, for all you know, there's 4 disciples, and that's all there's going to be.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what's really interesting is Galilee of today is not exactly Galilee of before. The main cities in Galilee were Nazareth, Tzipori, which is Sepphoris,
Cana,
Jotapata,
Can.
Tiberia, Magdala, Capernaum. So it's 10 main cities. But what's interesting is that they all kind of were around the Dead Sea. But the area, it's what I find interesting about this line is that he went through the Galilee. He did not consider going to Judea.
Yeah,
Why
that's
did he not go to Judea? He didn't go to, and we know Syria exists. Again, I just want you to imagine Israel today, where Syria is today, it's only to the north, the country of Syria. But where the Roman province of Syria in that day was also to the east of Galilee, where the
mhm.
Mediterranean, like Mount Carmel, where Haifa is today, if you know the geography of Israel, that was Roman, the province of Syria. So it's interesting. This is a very, very small, I don't want to say small, it's forever to walk because it's mountainous, but it's very small area, and it's surprising that he would stay there unless there's a reason.
That's something I meant to ask you, because we know that that Jesus came to Perea to be baptized by John the Baptist, and then from there he heads back into Nazareth and then to
Well,
Capernaum.
we know he went to the desert, which we
The,
say, again, Perea, just to remind you, is on the west side of the
Mhm.
Jordan. And we, for all we know, he was on the east side of Jordan, and that would have been in Judea.
Right, but yeah,
So,
but that would have been in Judea. But the point is that so he moved back to Galilee, and at this point, the evangelist says that Jesus and his disciples they stayed within Galilee, or that they didn't venture out of Galilee. So I meant to ask, is there a reason why, or what does it mean?
okay.
Like why?
So we're gonna have to make up a theory. I don't know the reason why to start. The answer is I don't know. But if I would ask you, very like just let's take human nature and psychology. What would be the reason that a person would confine himself to boundaries, self-imposed?
When you
What are the
mean
options?
bound? So
There's
when you mean
There's northern Galilee, there's southern Galilee, and there's Judea. It says over here that in Matthew he went throughout Galilee. It could have said he went throughout the Jewish lands, or it could have
so
said nowhere. He just traveled.
so
It
is it
wants us to
because
know Galilee.
yeah? So is it because if to come to Judea here, he has to travel through through Samaria, and Samaria is not Jewish country, right? Isn't Samaria Gentile land?
Oh no, it's a Jewish country. Again, we spoke about this. The lands of Decapolis, Perea, Judea, Syria, Galilee, all of them had Jews and non-Jews mixed. They were the most important thing to know about Samaria is there's Jewish cities throughout. When it's not like most places in the olden days, there were little villages, but he would go from urban center or from rural center from place to place. Most places, even in the Galilee today, are empty unless you go from city to city.
Yeah, I don't
So
know why. No, so
okay,
when you say
so
why,
let's take some options. I don't know that, again, like I'm not sure that the options are we're going to hear about John being killed, right? John gets killed.
well, okay, he's not killed yet. Now, aren't you
Right,
jumping
right, right.
ahead? So John is not killed. John has been he's
I,
been put in prison.
I didn't say anything yet.
John is put in prison at this point.
Right. So we know John is going to be killed. So what one thing we know is that one thing we don't know really why he went from Nazareth to Capernaum. There's various, we threw out some different possibilities, but one option is that Jesus did not feel safe outside of Galilee. That's one option. His safety was in Galilee. I'm not saying it's true.
Safe in what way?
Safe from like in different places, different parts of the government, he may not have felt safe. Was John safe over in the desert? Why did he go for? We don't know why he went from Nazareth to Capernaum. One option is that he didn't feel safe to go throughout everywhere, and he knew he was safe in the Galilee.
So when you mean safety, you mean physical safety.
I do mean physical safety.
Yeah, okay.
Another option is Nazareth, Capernaum. This is his territory. This is his hometown. He knows this neighborhood. And if you're going to go start a movement, you're not going to go to if I want to start a movement, I'm not going to go to Texas or Mexico or South America because I don't know the language. I don't know the interactions have to take place. He was kind of staying in his home base. This was really where he knew he could be most successful.
See, I find that hard to accept. So because when you say Jesus is from Nazareth, but he didn't start his ministry there. He moved to Capernaum. That's where he started.
Both of those are in the Galilee.
Yeah, they're in Galilee, but they're not the same place, right? I mean, so it
They're
felt
pretty
like
far. They're actually pretty far away from each other.
yeah, but it felt like in his hometown people didn't accept him because he said, "Who is this guy?" I mean, because everyone knew him. They're like, "We've known this guy. We know his parents. We know all about him." And so, okay,
Okay.
anyway,
So another option is that this is again, I guess it's the same thing. He was going to the urban and rural areas that he knew of, and he was able to identify the synagogues easily. Again, I feel this is a subcategory of the second one. Anyways, I think it's important that he stayed in the Galilee, that this is, if anything, not a nationwide movement. From
so
Matthew's
is
perspective, it's not a nationwide movement. He's not influencing Perea or Samaria or Judea or Syria or any of the Tetrarchy of Philip areas. He's only trying to influence Galilee, which means that the whole Jewish people at this time would not have been aware of his movement. They wouldn't have access to it. And I think that's maybe a third thing, that this is a localized movement. Okay, yeah.
so could this be because of Isaiah 9:1-2? Isaiah 9 speaks of the Galilee of the nations, and that verse is quoted on 4:15. that from the land of Naphtali and Zebulun, the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations, that the people dwelling there have seen a light. So versus his way of saying until the time was fulfilled, that he had to stay in Galilee to preach the gospel based on Isaiah 9,
So
1,
I
2.
think we're saying the same thing, that for whatever reason, he stayed there. Maybe he thought that it's, you're just saying like, maybe it was a prophecy fulfillment. He didn't think it was time to travel yet. So whatever reason, I think it's important that we're noting he's in Galilee. Okay. The next thing that he does is he teaches in the synagogues. So first of all, I think it's really interesting to note that you hear a synagogue and you probably think you know what synagogues are today.
It's a church. A synagogue is a church. A church.
So synagogue is a Greek word that means a place to collect people, just like the Hebrew word for a synagogue today is Beit Knesset. What's really interesting is that number one, there is a church, there is a synagogue church in Capernaum. It's from the 4th and 5th century CE, but the basalt, if you visit today, they say the basalt foundations are from the 1st century. So that's nice that we have a 1st century Capernaum synagogue. But when we look at the synagogues, what I want, they found one, I think in 2016 at Tel Rechesh near Mount Tabor. That's in the Lower Galilee. And they general, the ones, that was the first non-rural synagogue they found, an urban, non-urban synagogue, a rural, and it held 20 to 40 people. One of the biggest synagogues at the time was in Modi'in, built in the 2nd century BC. It had 3 rooms. So I number one, I want us to talk about context of size. We're not talking about thousands of people ever in these synagogues. And almost without fail, we're not talking about hundreds. We're almost always talking about in the teens. So I think that's just really interesting to note. We're talking about scores of people and not hundreds of people in these synagogues. Because I think when you imagine synagogues today, you imagine thousands of people. The great synagogue in Jerusalem holds 2,000. We're not talking about that. That's not what a synagogue was in the 1st century. Not only that, there is a movement in the 1st century, or definitely before that, to reject the idea of synagogues inherently. The idea of a synagogue really is what Reformed community calls synagogues today is a temple. The way they do that because we want Jews to recognize that they don't believe the temple is going to be rebuilt, the 3rd temple, and they don't want you to understand that they want you to understand a synagogue is a small temple. It's a place where you worship God. So it feels that sometimes it'll feel like a contradiction, synagogue versus temple. So when the temple's standing, the right thing to do is go to the temple. The idea that there is a synagogue is sometimes viewed as controversial. And if it's not controversial, it definitely isn't like what you can't imagine. Not everyone's going to synagogues. Some people only go on the high holidays to Jerusalem, or they do nothing. It's not obvious that everyone is going to synagogues at that time. When they did, is a small amount. So I wanted to put that in context so you understand.
So thank you for that. So the as you noticed, the synagogues were not big. There are probably 10, 20 people in each. What I'm intrigued is it says he was teaching. He didn't just go attend the synagogues. He went, he showed up, and he was teaching. So was it okay? Was it customary? Was it okay for a person to show up in each of these multiple synagogues and teach? And when we mean teach, right? Yeah, when you say teach, right, in this context, like he says, teaching and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. He wasn't there just to attend. He wasn't there as a bystander, but he was there as an active participant, somebody who was shaping the minds of people. And so, you know, it's one thing for John to preach, repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand in the wilderness. It's another thing for Jesus to show up in a synagogue and to preach, repent.
Okay, so let's go one point at a time. So the first point is that it says he's teaching in the synagogue, right?
Yeah.
So what's really interesting when you look at Mark and Luke, the parallels, Mark says, and he went throughout the Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogue and casting out demons. When you look at Luke, the parallel, and he continued proclaiming the message in the synagogue of Judea, which is awesome. So what word was missing from Mark and Luke? Teaching. It's not only an accident that's missing from Mark and Luke. Mark and Luke do not believe that Jesus taught. Mark and Luke believe that Jesus proclaims.
Okay.
And we'll talk, he preached. So teaching, what does teaching mean? Teaching usually means you take a verse and you analyze it. It means I read the Hebrew and I translate into Aramaic for the people who are in the 1st century synagogue, and I analyze it. And that usually shows a high level of understanding of Tanakh, of the Bible. It shows a high level of understanding of different hermeneutical techniques that are happening in the 1st century. And it means that he's a rabbi. It means that he has the ability to walk into synagogue and say, hi, I'm your guest speaker. This is great. He's not standing on a soapbox. He's standing at the front of the synagogue, and he's saying, I'm going to probably lead you in prayers. I'm going to lead you today in today's services. And this model doesn't exist in Mark and Luke. And the question you have to ask yourself is why? Why would Mark and Luke not want Jesus to be a teacher too? Not only that, if we believe in marking in priority, that Mark wrote it first, it means Matthew actively added that Jesus was a teacher. And it
So
could
the
have been
que-
like obvious. Of course he's a teacher.
so the question becomes not so much why did Mark and Luke leave it out. The question becomes why did the evangelist add this? Because
Correct.
if this came from there, like what was his objective or what was his goal in adding that Jesus was teaching in the synagogue? And so it sounds like you make a distinction between proclaiming and teaching. Proclaiming, so proclaiming is when
it's
yeah,
right here. Teaching the synagogue. It's the verse.
yeah. So okay, so teaching, as you said, at some point represents this deep command over the Tanakh and the scriptures. But what about proclaiming? Proclaiming, the only thing I can think of is him saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Right? I mean, that's the only thing.
Okay,
that's the thing he's been.
Okay, so let's switch to that. So we're cool with teaching. So one of the things, as you heard, proclaiming the good news, proclaiming the message, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have that. So the first thing we have to notice is like, so first you're questioning, what does proclaiming mean? So I'll tell you, whatever it is that John was saying about the kingdom of heaven, what it meant to have this ideological twist in their brain, in their consciousness. But what you also have to notice about Jesus is that he's not saying what John said here. He's not saying the kingdom of heaven is in hand. The kingdom of his heaven is around the corner. What does he say?
I thought he's saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." That's what he says in 17,
No, listen,
4:17.
Yeah, but over here he says he's proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of heaven.
Proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. Okay.
The difference is it's not in the future anymore. It's not in hand. In hand, I told you, means it's immediate. It's gonna like literally one thing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So okay, so well, thank you for the distinction. So 4:17 is in the future. Yes, it's in,
Yeah. So when
repent.
John the Baptist talks about the kingdom of heaven in Matthew 3:2, and then Jesus talks about it in 4:1, it's always in hand. It's always about to happen. This is now Jesus enters synagogues. The itinerant preacher, the sophist, whatever you want, the guy comes, and it's so important. The kingdom of heaven is here. He literally has started his ministry, he started his message, and in his head, the world changed already. John that he's Messiah. Yeah.
So it sounds like in the Gospel of Matthew, this is the very first time where it says that the kingdom of heaven is in the present tense, as in it's here. It's not in the future. It's not will come, but as in the kingdom of heaven is now, right now, and this is the start. Would that be accurate? That this is the first.
But to add to like, you had a very good question. Like, how does one proclaim in not a silly way, right? You're saying it's at hand, and I think one thing you have to take in consideration. If I asked you, what is a first century church used for? Or synagogue. It probably be more closely parallel what it's used for. So I found that Josephus notes that synagogues in the first century were used for political meetings, for schools, for communal meals. Acts 22:19 says it's used for hostels. Matthew 2 says it's used for giving out charity. So I think that if you imagine Jesus as a revolutionary who's trying to change, the synagogue is the right place, not because it's a place of prayer, not because it's a place of teaching, but because of all the other things that takes place there. If you want to uproot and have an upheaval of the way the world is going, you need to give out charity. You need to have these communal meals. You need to have hostels. You have to take care of everyone. And he's given this opportunity to use synagogue, not in the classic pray, collect everyone. It's in all the other ways, as Josephus and Acts and Matthew mentioned later on, and that's how he can use that. So I think when he's proclaiming the good word, or the good news, it's not because he's teaching or saying a pithy statement in the kingdom of heaven. It's because he's acting there. He's being a communal leader. He's being a communal, or he's the Obama of Chicago.
That's right. That's exactly what I meant to say.
Pre-Senator Obama.
It's President Obama. That's right. So here's the obvious thing, right? So we saw Simon and Andrew, that Jesus used his Greek word, as in Simon called Peter, and then James and John the Greek word. And now they're at a synagogue. A synagogue, by definition, it's a Jewish place, right? I mean, please hold on. No, please don't tell me that any Greek and Roman person or any Gentile can just walk in. So it feels like the earlier passage was focused. That one of the big themes there was that that Jesus chose disciples who could blend in and out of the Jewish world and the Greek world, but now it's focused exclusively, mainly on the Jewish
Well,
world.
I don't know who's going to synagogues.
Come on, Rabbi. I
No,
mean, you've
no,
got to
I
be.
point out, for example, outside of the Temple Mound, there's a sign that exists today. It's awesome. It says in Greek, from outside the Temple Mound in Jerusalem, any non-Jews who pass this point are killed. It's forbidden. It's a very famous sign. It doesn't say killed. It says like are penalized by death by heaven, whatever. So there was an idea that the Temple Mound in certain places, specifically the temple, was forbidden non-Jews. And the point is that everywhere else non-Jews are allowed to go. I think the synagogue is the collection place for Jews, but I think just like Obama was the community organizer, I think that Jesus would have made sure that Capernaum was working when he went there. He would have made sure that Nazareth was working there. But yeah, when he's preaching, when he's saying this, he's speaking to Jews, of course.
Yeah, but isn't that a big shift? Like we're starting the kingdom of heaven. Like this is the first time the kingdom of heaven is present. It's here, and that's being said primarily and exclusively only in a synagogue with a Jewish audience. Even though that his disciples, as you noticed, he chose them with a Greek name.
Okay, I'm going to speak some good Christian heresy now, but maybe Jesus didn't care about non-Jews. Maybe Jesus was only trying to make the Jews go and do something. I know you may not. I know your Pauline brain may not accept that, but like it could be Jesus just didn't care about. Again, like I'm not accepting it. I'm just saying like if you want to like focus on the point, maybe Jesus' movement was for Jews, and the others didn't matter.
So it's less a question. It's less a question of theology. It's more a question of did the evangelist, was he trying to show something through this? So this is not so much a question of theology as in, did Jesus care about non-Jews or not? I mean, like that's a whole, but what from your vantage point, do you see the evangelist trying to highlight or mention something by mentioning that, by giving his disciples Greek names, but then in the very next passage, pivoting to a synagogue?
So again, I don't want to read ahead, but like 2 verses later, and great crowds followed him from Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem. Like he did a good job. Everyone came to him, crowds. So I don't see it as a big place. I think synagogue literally means a place to collect people, and that was a place where you go to talk. That's the soapbox of the time. So I don't see great meaning in like going synagogue versus going to the town square. It could be if you scream in the town square, it would be. And again, like it could be you starve the Jews. Okay.
So it sounds like President Obama copied the model of Jesus, as in social justice.
Obama would be very proud to hear that. He's a good guy. Okay. Our last point we're going to talk about, which is I'm running out of time from a Sabbath perspective.
Yeah.
But like this is the first time. So what does Jesus do in this verse? He teaches.
Healing. He proclaims.
And then he cures every disease and every sick among people. Let me give you some different translations so we hear. So our first one will be curing every disease and every sickness among the people, which Mark says cast out demons, which might mean the same thing, by the way. I have no problem. Another translation is healing all manner of sickness and all manner of disease among the people. Another translation, and healing every disease and every sickness among the people. So that is 3 translations and Mark. So tell me what he does. What is Jesus doing?
According to the evangelist, he's healing every disease and every affliction among the people.
But what's interesting, when I think of Jesus, I always think of like healed, like what they do today, that he's healing individuals. What's interesting is that there's no mention of individuals in this. It sounds like he's just kind of like, healing all the people. And I thought this would be a good sidebar to have. What is the like? Why is he healing? Like what's happening? As a miracle. So this is a miracle worker. This is like we have sophist, itinerant preacher, fisherman, carpenter, and now we have miracle worker. So the miracle worker, the most famous first century miracle worker that we have in Jewish tradition is a guy named Honi, the circle maker. And the way he would do a miracle is he would make it rain upon command. He would demand of God rain, and the miracle would happen. What's really interesting is that Jesus's miraculous power, it just sounds like this is something like, is he praying to have them healed? How's he healing them? What's happening? Is he touching?
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. So here's one possible meaning. It could also mean that the evangelist meant healing, as in healing happening through the context of proclaiming the gospel. It's possible.
Right. So okay. Yeah, we'll go to that in a second. I just want to go back. So when you look at healing from a Jewish context, I just want to point out that there's this really interesting argument, which you're probably going to find stupid, but it's a really interesting argument. Are human beings allowed to heal? Again, I know what you're saying. Post enlightenment, it's so obvious, but there's a very famous argument in that time period if you're allowed to heal, because if you try to heal someone, if you're a doctor, what are you saying? Healing is not in the hands of God. Again, you got to take off your modern hat for a second, because you say, oh no, God heals through medicine, but they didn't believe that back then. They believed some people believed, if you are trying to heal, then God is no longer, there's a verse that says God is a healer. So if you are trying to heal, then God is no longer the healer, and you're acting as a heretic, because only God heals. So again, like when you may never heard this. So I just want to give you a couple of verses. So rabbinic Judaism goes out of its way to prove that you're allowed to heal. There was such a strong current in the first, second, third century that you're not allowed to heal at all. It is in God's hands, that they took a verse from Exodus. You can look up after I would say them in 21:19-20, and it says that they take that where it says you're thoroughly healed, and the rabbinic commentators, that means that you're allowed to try to heal. In Deuteronomy, they even say, it sounds so funny to you if you never heard it, that you're allowed to restore someone's lost property. What is their lost property? Their health. Oh, and if their health is lost, then you're allowed to try. It was, and the last verse is in Exodus, very famous in 19:16. It says, love your neighbor. How do you love your neighbor? By healing them. The reason that these sound so crazy to me is because there must have been such a strong strand in the first, second, and third century about that you're not allowed to heal, that the rabbis say, oh, you're returning lost property, that's your health. Oh, love your neighbor, that's your health. So I think that when you look at this idea, who's the one who's healing in the Bible? Eliyahu, a Navi, he's a healer. Moses prays for Miriam to be healed from her, I don't know how to say tsaras in English, or white disease. Chizkiyahu is told, but King Chizkiyahu is told by Isaiah, Yeshayahu, that that you're going to die. I can pray for you. What you see is, how do you heal?
By praying.
So if you're a doctor, you heal through medicine, but if you're a rabbi or if you're a prophet, or you heal through prayer. And what I find so interesting is over here is that, if anything, I feel Jesus is taking on a God-like property here for the first time. We never see, in my humble opinion, Jesus acting godly until now. God, in this century, God is the one who cures. What this verse should have said from a rabbinic perspective that's not heretical should have said that good news of the kingdom, and prayed for every disease to be cured, and it was cured. He didn't have to pray according to this verse. He was acting godly. He was acting messianic. And again, I think in the classic trope of a miracle worker, I get that. But miracle workers, there's different ways miracle workers work. Honi Hama'agel, the first century famous miracle worker, he prayed to God. And that's how he acted to miracles. And there's no prayer here, which I think is so interesting when you take into context how healing was viewed during that time period. Okay. I just want to give that disclaimer. Now, just putting that all aside, I'm going to go back to what you said before. I think you're dead right. Say it again. What does this really mean? Tell me what it really means, Isaac, when it says that Jesus is healing.
That he was healing. So I probably lost you. So what I said is to the context of preaching, as he preached, right? So this is the first place where we saw kingdom of heaven is here, that he preached, he proclaimed the gospel, that proclaiming the gospel was a healing. Proclaiming, people were hearing that in of itself was a form of healing. Because again, from this verse, it's hard to say that Jesus touched somebody or he did something. Maybe he did, but it's also the act of hearing the gospel the act of hearing the gospel was a form of healing, and it was a form.
I think you're 100% right.
Amen.
I mean, but on a dual level. So if you, we'll do verse 24 next. Let's just read it really quickly, just so you see. But his fame spread, blah blah blah. He went he healed, and they brought out the sick, afflicted with diseases, pains, blah blah blah, and he cured them. So, end of the day, we have to say there's physical healing taking place.
Yeah, it took place.
But let's throw that away for a second, because I think the symbolic idea of people hearing the proclamation of the kingdom of heaven and them being cured of all ills is implied here. And I think that's the main message. Yes, he's healing. Yes, he's a miracle. Yes, people sick and whatever happens in verse 24. But the real healing is the proclamation.
Yeah, I think the big point in this is the first time, as you say, where Jesus acts godlike. He did not pray for healing. Healing is something he did, and this would have been a big step or a big difference compared to how folks had to pray for healing versus this guy was just healing people, and the kingdom of heaven is
And
his.
I think just to add to that, the fact that Matthew is the only one that has teaching, I think Matthew views the proclamation has an embedded of Torah in it, of teaching. That if you want to know what the kingdom of heaven is, you got to study, you got
It's
to
true.
kind of internalize, and that's why I think that he's able to cure them through the same verse having proclamation. But to me, like I'm sure this is not really factually true, but there's this progression. Ready? You learn, that equals the proclamation of the kingdom of heaven, which equals your soul being cured. I think there's like this 3-stage process that Matthew doesn't have, that Mark doesn't have. Mark, he proclaims a message, casts out demons. And it's almost like that's a miracle worker. But that miracle worker wasn't good enough for Matthew. Matthew is rooted in text study, like we're doing.
Yeah,
And that text study, it's that Torah,
study.
ideas, learning equals the proclamation. So that is how you proclaim the kingdom of heaven, that you internalize it, and then you are able to go and be cured. Okay, Sabbath is upon us.
Rabbi, on that note, have a great Shabbos. Kingdom of heaven is here. Jesus is godlike, or the first time he acts God, he acts godlike. Lots to unpack in this and think about. But thank you, Rabbi. Have a great Shabbos, and talk to you next week then.
Okay, have a great Shabbos. Okay, thank you. Bye. Okay, Isaac.
Okay, well,
I
it's
did not.
it's it's
Okay.
still recording.
Yeah.